And hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Perspectives. I am Darren Jaime. We thank you for joining us. And listen, we want to let you know coming up on today's show, we're talking about a very important issue. We continue through the month of October to recognize Domestic Violence Awareness Month and our conversation about the modern slavery of human trafficking and all the subcategories of the horrific act. We discuss the intersection of equity, equality, the disparities, the multi dimensions of youth, family, and community engagement. Our guest, Dr. Alice Farrell, she joins us back on the show, and she's going to share with me on perspectives with yours truly, Darren Hyman.
What's on your mind? Express what's on your mind. What's on your mind?
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
Make a difference in someone's life. Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Perspectives. Darren Jaime here. And yes, you can join us every week here on BronxNet Channel 67, also on Verizon Files. We invite you to stay connected to us on our social media platforms. That's BronxNet TV. Now, if you're looking to reach me personally, I want you to reach me on my professional page, Darren C. Jaime, on Facebook, and then on Twitter and Instagram. That's DC Jaime 23. And there you can get some information and possibly even some inspiration as well. Well, I want to let you know that we're glad to continue this conversation, a conversation we really don't want to have, but we need to have here. As October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we want you to know that we've been talking a lot. In our last show, we talked a little bit about human trafficking, what that looks like, because many people just look at human trafficking from one perspective. But there's other perspectives that are tied to it. There's also the issue of domestic labor and forced labor and how sometimes we're participants in that, what we need to do in order to deal with that. And then we talked a little bit about the disparities when it comes to healthcare. And it was so much that we couldn't really tackle it in one show. So we're glad to be able to continue to this conversation with an individual that's here to share expertise and give us some experience as to what this all really means. Her name, Dr. Alice Farrell. If you haven't joined us before, she's here with us again. She's the president and CEO of Olive Branch Clinical and Consulting Services. She has over 3 decades of clinical social worker experience, as well as being an international trainer, motivational speaker, as well as a clinical consultant. She has actively spent her whole career helping across sectors of child welfare, juvenile justice, and most of all, mental wellness. She joins us now here on Perspectives again. And Dr. Farrell, glad to have you back. And I want to talk to you about this conversation with COVID, because a lot of us really began to understand in a wider community, WIDER, a wider community of what these health disparities actually look like due to COVID-19. And if it wasn't for COVID-19, I don't think more of the general community would have an insight as to how these disparities exist.
Yes, I would agree with you on that, COVID-19 really did unveil. Many of us knew, but a wider community now is paying attention. And a couple of things, really. When we think around COVID-19 and the intersection of everything that was going on, the horrors, the death, the dying, separation, loss, the anxieties, the uncertainties, all of those things were just such an impact on individual families and communities, right? And then we get to that space of treatment, access to care, quality care, who can be seen, who can't be seen, when they can be seen, when they can't be seen, right? And then we get to see beyond that, taking a look now at what's happening in physical health care. So, for example, when we're thinking about diabetes and diabetes treatment, when we're thinking about amputation or not to amputate, but rather to look at life, quality of life and changes with behaviors. more often than not, what would typically be stated is that it is an individual person. It's their behavior, it's their choice, and what they're eating, it's their choice, and that is why they're in this condition. And really, do we ever kind of take a look at the systemic pieces? So when we're thinking about systemic pieces, we're thinking about social determinants of health. So food insecurity, food desert. We're thinking about transportation, access to or not. We're thinking about neighborhood safety, sidewalks that can, when they're safe and when the sidewalks are repaired, they can help with the obesity reduction processes of running, walking, and so forth. We're not necessarily thinking about these drivers or determinants of health. Sometimes we're not even thinking about the fact that within that the institutions, whether it's the family qualified health center, the private clinic, or another medical facility, what about their system, their processes, their practices that might be contributing to the actual physical condition of individuals within the community? And so when I'm just really are looking at the research and listening, we're able to see quickly a few things. So I'm just going to pause on a couple of things just for a moment. When we're thinking about amputation, for example, or diabetes, we can see in research that so often the more aggressive treatment, which is to amputate an individual's limb, you will find that occurring relatively more quickly with persons of color, right? I've heard where some individuals say, when you go in that neighborhood, all you see is wheelchairs. That's all you see, wheelchairs and those mobile things, because so many individuals' legs are amputated, right? When we think about behavioral health care, and before I go there, let me just also speak to this matter. More often than not, Black men are villainized when it comes to the care of their children or being part of the treatment process for their children if they're not around, right? They're villainized, they're not involved. When they do become involved, what we see, and we are seeing it, and we are speaking up against about it, is that they are treated as if they're invisible when they're sitting right next to their woman or their child in the medical setting. They're literally looked over, no communication with them. So they're villainized or they're made to be invisible. That's disparate, right? When we think about let me give you an example. I was doing research and I came across this ethnopharmacology. And what that speaks to is where medication is distributed based on and taken into consideration the person in terms of race, ethnicity, just those kinds of areas. And they were zeroing in on schizophrenia, an African-American male. And what they were noticing, while the sample was small, this is what they were noticing. The medication that was given to the white individual for schizophrenia, their body absorbed it at a much faster rate. The African-American male, their body was absorbing it at a lower time period. So in essence, that medication was still in the body when the next dose was being administered. So you get to see them in a catatonic state, zombie-like, and that is an issue. So even though that's known, ethnopharmacology, it doesn't mean that every prescribing individual is going to take that into account, right? And so now let me just switch over very quickly to behavioral health, specifically when, and this is my area now, 30 years, right? And we definitely know that people of color, youth of color, are getting diagnosed with more intense diagnoses. They don't necessarily start over here, although maybe it's just an adjustment disorder. Maybe something is going on and that's where it lands. No, they're moving quickly into intermittent episode, violent anger. They putting them in very higher,
Harsh categories.
yeah, yeah.
But I mean, it really speaks to one issue, right? That sometimes in this, cultural competence can be a huge, a huge bridge builder in order to make these things better.
Yes.
But unfortunately, we're not seeing enough in cultural competence. A, that people are receptive to it, and B, that we're not preaching it enough. What do we do in order to improve the cultural competence? You gave the analogy before about the medicine being administered, and here we got children of people of color, and it takes a little bit more. If it takes a little bit more, then we need to know it takes a little bit more, and it's okay. But yet and still, if you don't have that cultural competence, we're speaking two totally different languages.
Absolutely. So let me just speak to that for a moment. For years, individuals have spoken about culture competence continuum, starting with color blindness and going all the way to cultural proficiency. And when you get to cultural competence, oh, you've made it in essence. Man, you get to cultural proficiency, your organization, you're it. That's it. Years later, it's no, wait a second. We really need to be thinking about cultural humility. We need to be thinking about not this segmented piece where you think you've made it. You have not made it. I've not made it. We are working together with our families. This is what's needed for us to be culturally aware and to be willing to come alongside a family, an individual, engaging them in conversation about what does this mean for them in terms of their culture. How does their culture impact their assessment of where they are and their willingness or not to engage in treatment? What is the actual impact of their culture? And then what are some of the things that are taboo? And what is it that I need to know? So it's a sense of, I don't know it all. I can't know it all. For example, no culture is monolithic in terms of everything about them is embedded in this one individual. So there's subgroups, even within culture, and subgroups, even within those subgroups. So in that space of authentic curiosity, wanting to know for the betterment and for the purpose of informing the treatment process, that's the space, that's the platform to come from. But that's the ideal. We still have individuals in our field that do not go to the depth of what's necessary. So someone may come in and, for example, and this happened, I was doing a training and I asked the individuals, tell me about your population. And someone said, I'm working with 2 families, they're from Africa. And I was waiting to hear the rest, and there was nothing else coming. So I spoke to the fact that Africa, we need to be able to look further and find out which nation. And then we need to find out a little bit more in terms of their transition from their geographic region, because all of that impact the individuals as well as it plays out in their treatment experience. And so the norm is culturally competent, linguistically appropriate services. You get the training, but it cannot be a one-time thing. It must be embedded in their culture, their continuous quality improvement processes to ensure that it's integrated across their procedure and their practices.
Let me do this. I got to take a quick break, but when I come back, I want to talk a little bit more about juvenile justice for a minute. I want to talk about these numbers because you're really specializing in them, and there's a reason that you've taken that and taken it to another level. So I want to take a quick break, talk more with Dr. Farrell, and we'll be back in a minute. we're back here on Perspectives, and we're glad to continue the conversation. And Doctor, let me ask you this: when we were talking before the break, we're talking a little bit about the juvenile justice system, right? And understanding that the juvenile justice system sees these disparities, and what it really can do in a child's life, emotionally, psychologically, and then also in the long term, right? You talk about getting a job. You got this history now. You got all these things that play out, and it really impacts a person's future. Give us a little bit more from your perspective, because I know this is something that you speak to in your workshops and things like that. What can we be doing better is what I think we need to be focusing on.
Okay. All right. Thank you for asking that question. And one quick comment I need to make. We need to take a look at the education system. We need to take a look at the records of students in this regard. What we're finding is many of the behavior of the children are being criminalized. And so the record that they're creating is really preparing that child to be expelled, to go into juvenile justice. And what we're finding is that that's really that pipeline. That's really that preparation for prison, right? When we think about the disparities years ago, this was back in maybe 2001. I did my first presentation on juvenile justice, and it was a Spencer report at the time. And they spoke about the disproportionality of overrepresentation of people, youth of color in the juvenile justice system. 20 years later, I went to do a research, right? And it's the same matter before us. Disproportionality, overrepresentation of minority youth in the juvenile justice system. So what we were seeing was same issue, same misdemeanor, same concern, done by a black child, brown child, black and brown, people of color, over here, white child. The white child will more often be directed down a mental health path, so they get the treatment. The person of color, that youth, will be directed toward juvenile justice system, right? Now, lots of work, beautiful, intense, revolutionary type work is being done in that area, but we still have those issues. So the point of contact is what we need to be taking a look at. So in the school system, the contact with the police officers, because the police officers get to make some decisions at that point. When they go through the adjudication processes, when they're sitting, and I've been in these meetings, when they're sitting and having conversations to see, can this child benefit from a juvenile review board experience instead of getting further into the JJ system, right? There are options, but in order to think about the options, we need diversity of individuals at that table. We need to make sure that individuals who are impacted, affected, know the nuances of the community, the politics of the geography, what's going on, to be in those meetings, informing the development of policies and practices. That's one of the other piece there. The other aspect is this: we need to make sure that those who are working with our youth know them in terms of child development. Everyone needs training in child development. Everyone needs to understand how to support families in building up their protective factors that help with their overall health and wellness, and reducing the risk factors that many of the families have. We also need to make sure that individuals are not just going to these bias training, implicit bias training, and going back to business as usual. Because too often our young men are seen as actual men because of their sizes. Our young women are seen as a woman instead of, oh, she's a fifth grader, because of their sizes. And so those biases that come in affect the academic experience of the children, affect their social emotional learning, affect their capacity to remain inside of classroom settings, to take in the instructions that they're given, because they're constantly in a space of whether am I in a safe space or am I not? Am I able to trust this person in front of me, or do I not trust this person? So those are some of the pieces that I would share very quickly.
Well, I will also have an opportunity to let you share about this because you have taken all your work and your passion and looking at some of these discrepancies when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to the juvenile justice system. And these are part of an upcoming book I know that you got. So I want to give you the opportunity to share a little bit about the book and what we can learn coming from you in your future writing.
Thank you so very much for that. My first 4 books are out there and they are on spiritual growth related matters. This one is specific to the intersection of equity and disparity. And I looked at the mental dimension of youth, family, and community engagement. Across the board, I am saying, while we may have evidence based models that are great to bring into the communities, we must focus on that aspect of engagement. And there are critical pieces that must be in place at an organizational level and an individual level. I'm saying inside of the book that it's time that we revolt. And I use the acronym revolt because in law school, I had to learn a lot of content and acronyms helped me with that. So the revolt piece that I'll speak to is about being resolved. Every one of us in our communities and anyone who would like to take on allyship, if that's their prerogative, is to be resolved about learning about our communities, our history, our rich history before the transatlantic slave trade and then after. Be resolved about learning about the issues that are affecting our communities, our children, our families. And then engagement, that's the E. Engage on all levels, micro, meso, macro level. Engage, engage, engage. Become part of, educate yourself, empower yourself through that process of education, resource, data mining, connecting with like-minded individuals, and seeking a deeper understanding of what it is that we're up against. Then the V is voice amplification. Amplify the voices of the traditionally disenfranchised, marginalized individuals. Bring them to every table that we are positioned in. Then obstruction. That piece is simply saying obstruct every law, policy, procedure, practices that maintain institutional racism. And there are myriad of ways for obstruction. We see through legislative processes, through voting, through, the marches, through boycott, through emailing, all sort of ways. And then when we come to the L, it's leveraging. So leveraging simply means we need to keep in mind what the issues are that's facing our communities and leverage our privilege. So if the person has white privilege, I'm not interested in them being guilty, feeling guilty about it. What I am saying in the book is use your white privilege to and for the betterment of addressing the issues and supporting the dismantling of institutions in terms of the institutional racism and the systemic and structural oppression. If you have social network and social economic status privilege, use it, leverage it. And then when we come to the T, I'm saying be transparent, and demand transparency. So that's the revolt.
Well, I want to make sure that people get an opportunity to get a chance to get your book. So before we go right now, tell people how they can put their hands on some of your former books and when you're looking to release this new one.
Wonderful. So it's on the slide there on the screen. olivebranchclinical.com is my website. olivebranchclin@aol.com. You can email me if you want to schedule a conversation with me. I'm more than happy to do that. 860-977-5014. And I will be shooting for the beginning of January in terms of this particular book. So thank you so much for letting me share that.
No, Dr. Farrell, thank you so much for being with us. I mean, you've been with us for a couple of shows, and I think it's very important during this month to be able to highlight, to be able to talk about the issues that matter the most. And certainly it's been our pleasure and our honor to have you here with us here on Perspectives. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
All righty, viewers, and we want to let you know that during this time of October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we talked about domestic violence, we talked about human trafficking, but not just the simple human trafficking. We talked about domestic labor and forced labor. We've talked about the opportunities for so many people that are in trouble to be able to have resources to be able to get out. We talked about how COVID-19 has further exacerbated what's going on in our community by way of domestic violence and how intimate partner violence is really on the rise. And so a lot of things that we talked about, I hope that you grabbed onto something that you can be able to play a part in, whether it's sharing your voice, sharing your knowledge, or even sharing a resource. I'm Darren Jaime saying thank you for watching with us here on Perspectives. We make sure to tune into the show where we continue to bring you the issues that matter the most. I want to let you know again, if you want to reach me again on my personal page, it's Darren C. Jaime on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, DC Jaime 23. There you can get some information as well as some inspiration as well. All right, everybody, I'm out of here, but we will join you next week where we'll elevate the conversation. We'll have more dialogue, and we'll continue to invite you to share your perspective with somebody else, because it just might make a difference in somebody else's life. Take care.